The Sandy and Toddcast is a Mindgarden Media podcast in association with
Screw You, Todd
Productions. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry, but Dave is not here this week.
He's disappointed too.
I'm sure he is. Everybody's disappointed. You guys did a great job last week.
Thank you.
But it is another episode of the Sandy and Toddcast. We are talking about history, and we got another great story to share this week for you.
Here we go. We're coming up very shortly with the next episode.
You got it. Season 8, Episode 5, History Ain't No Mystery continues on the Sandy and Toddcast.
Feeling a bit lost? Not sure what's holding you back? A transformational tarot session with Eclectic Path Wellness can provide the guidance you need, combining tarot and coaching to help you understand and navigate the changes you may face. Heal, empower, and clarify your path. Connect with us on Facebook at Eclectic Path Wellness.
Broadcasting from two very different yet magical places not found on any map. Get ready to discuss the strange, weird, ghostly, crazy, spooky, and odd things that take place around us each and every day. All while having a little bit of fun. This is the Sandy and Toddcast.
It's the Sandy and Toddcast. She is Sandy.
He is Todd.
And Dave is nowhere to be found. What's he doing right now?
He's out. He calls it putzing.
Oh, yeah. That sounds like
He's
my dad.
out.
My dad always said that. What do you do today, Dad? Well, I just punched around. And...
He cannot sit still. I can sit still, but I have to be doing something. But
Yeah.
he cannot literally sit still, especially on a beautiful day. So he's like outside weed whacking and mowing the lawn. He's in love with his mower because it's one of the electrical ones.
Yeah.
It's not gas powered. And this is our second season with it, and he's in love with it. So he mows every chance he gets, which I think is hilarious because it's quiet and there's no gas smell and nothing. So he loves his mower. So he's out doing that. And, it's funny you said that Dave was nowhere to be found because it's so interesting. The difference between you and I co-hosting the podcast and me and with having Dave as sort of a guest last week. I just totally went into my interview mode.
I heard that. I did hear that.
I totally went into my interview mode.
And
whereas
you
and
didn't need
I, we don't. I know.
Because
I know.
he's he sounded great because, he's done radio his whole life. So it's just like no big deal to him. He just came in and did whatever needed to be done.
Yeah.
I did notice you go into the
literally a radio interview last week. And I was laughing to myself. I'm like, you'll never get the radio out of me totally. But like when it's you and I, we just have that podcast flow with us, but like what I feel like in the back of my head, it was like, okay, I have a special guest this week, even though it's been my husband, 18 years of marriage this month. We've been together 21 years total.
Good Lord.
That's a long time.
Yeah,
I know. Tell me about it. Poor Dave. # poor Dave. And so I totally went into interview mode. It was really, really funny. I haven't done that in a while. So
I do that even in like everyday conversations with people because I do get interested in their stories and what their life is about. And so I will eventually, I'll roll into it.
Yeah, it's funny that you say it like that. I didn't really think about it like that. But when I was in the dollar store yesterday.
Here we go. I was just imagining this. Somebody came up and started telling you stories.
Yes, there was a lady in the card aisle. I was getting a anniversary card for Dave. There was a lady in the card aisle.
Dave, she went to the dollar store. Just so you know, that's real love.
Let's spend $6 in, even Walmart is $6 now. But anyway, and they have nice cards. They have regular cards in there. And so anyways, this lady is standing next to me, a little in front of me, and she kind of half sneezed, like, how you try and hold it in. And I said, God bless you. And that was all I needed to say. Then we were best friends. And so she started telling me, but in that, the point being in that I did ask her some questions back because that I just naturally go into that mode because, I'm an interviewer. That's what I love to do. I love to talk to people. I don't like it necessarily. I hate to say I don't like it. It's that I have put my boundaries up more over the years now because of being an empath. So it's a little more difficult with me sometimes if they come at me.
Yeah.
But if I go to them, it's a lot easier. And that's sort of when the interview mode comes in. So
I have found when they come at you, sometimes if you go into interview mode, you can actually diffuse the situation because you then control the information coming at you.
Yes.
And you
Agreed.
and if you feel, chaotic energy or whatever, you can kind of veer that off a little bit if you take control of the situation and maybe you get out of there a little bit faster.
That's an amazing point. And I don't even know if it's conscious for me at this point, but I do tend to try to take charge a lot in those situations.
Really? Or just in general?
Yeah. No. Well, you know me.
we know you. We were listening to an old podcast this week or last week, and it was one of those where it was like, I was like, let's get a little timer thing. And then when you talk, we'll hit the timer. And then when I talk, we'll hit the timer and we'll see who talks the most.
Well, it's funny. I use for my full-time job, but also for my other things that I do, my other audio stuff, I use an app called Descript. And I was having problems with Descript all week. So Dave went in and cleaned out the computer and closed down things working in the background and all of that stuff. And I was going through a lot of old files that I have on my computer. And I found that clip and all it said was Mexican radio. And I'm like, Mexican radio? Wait a minute. It goes all the way back to like season 1. I made a clip for a best of episode. And we were talking about that and Mexican radio, a song Mexican radio I'd never heard of in my life. And you were singing it and just some fun stuff. And it was great to watch. And I actually found the first 10 episodes that we recorded instead of using StreamYard like we use now.
Yeah.
I have them on Zoom.
Oh, great.
And they're hilarious, and I'm going to keep them, and I might actually release them because they're just so funny to watch.
That'd be fun. You could do that.
Yeah, I think I might put them up on our YouTube. So yeah. So last week had a week off for us as a team, but brought on my partner in life to discuss our journey together in this weird thing called the paranormal world. And so yesterday... This week, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the experiences that I had yesterday. Yesterday was kind of a turning point for me in a couple of ways. Some things happened that I don't think have happened quite in the same way as they have before. And then next week, we'll talk about my trip to Pennsylvania to visit my ancestors. But this week, I thought, let's talk about what happened yesterday because I thought it was kind of interesting. And I started to tell you about it beforehand. And I thought, well, let's just talk about it on the show today. So yesterday, Dave, a lot of people know that Dave and I have a camp. It's about 40 minutes from here. And it's out near Canastota, New York, Casanova, New York, Morrisville, out in that area. And there's a and during the summertime, we like to do geocaching, which is basically like treasure hunting. If you're not familiar with it, I won't explain the whole thing, but go ahead and look it up. It's kind of fun to learn about. And one of the other things we like to do is just drive around and check out historic places. We go to a lot of cemeteries. A lot of people are uncomfortable with cemeteries. I am not uncomfortable with cemeteries. I tend to be drawn to them, especially the ones that have a lot of history. And you and I have talked a lot on this show in the past about how much we love history and the stories of the people that are buried in the cemeteries and how we we feel like we give them they're remembered, like they're acknowledged when we tell their stories. Right? And so one of the things that I do, that I really enjoy doing, because I feel like I'm helping in a weird way, is I like to visit cemeteries. And I like to take usually just my K2 meter. It might be another piece of equipment. And I like to offer the opportunity to anyone who might be in that cemetery who has passed away to communicate with me. And I think it's a combination of my being sensitive and the fact that I have the equipment with me and the fact that I go with honor and respect and peace. And I give them this opportunity to do that. So Dave and I visited a few different places yesterday. Now, and let me just explain that I'm not investigating in the cemetery.
I was just going to say to you, I was going to break in and just say, I've always heard like groups that investigate. I'll never investigate a cemetery. It's rude, blah, 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 blah. I don't know that I investigate really anywheres when you look at it that way, because I really do feel like you're trying to find out the story. So maybe you're almost doing like an investigative reporting kind of thing. But certainly the thing about cemeteries that I like, I'm not going there because it's filled with spirits and it's going to be an easy target. I'm going there because here's a monument that's been there for almost 200 years. This person probably lived 275 years ago or whatever it is. I can see the name. Sometimes there's even family members on their marker, son of or daughter of or whatever, right? You see the dates that they were living. And sometimes on the markers, there's other bits of information. And to go there and, like you say, remember, almost pay respect.
Yeah.
And I love the fact that you're doing these things because I get to see the video of it. And it's just so it's interesting to me. It's like, to me, it's not like going out and getting a thrill. You're not going there to get a thrill or anything like that. You're trying to allow them to tell their story. So I'll let you continue now.
Well, no, and thank you for that, because don't get me wrong. It is thrilling. I'm not thrill seeking. It is exciting to be, and I don't even think it, sometimes it'll hit me in the middle of it, these conversations. And I'll kind of get like tongue-tied, like I don't know what to ask next. Like you draw a blank because you just don't know where to go. It's like almost like I can't believe this is happening right now.
Right.
And sometimes you just get excited at it afterwards. Like after I take the video, I'll send it to you and then I'll watch it myself. And I get so excited because not because it's thrill-seeking, but because it's thrilling to feel as if I'm helping in some way,
Mm-hmm.
And I haven't always done this. This is just something I started doing in the past, I would say, year when I realized I could. It's really interesting to me. So, for example, to your point about going and seeing other information.
Right.
There is a cemetery in Canastota called Mount Pleasant, and I'll tell a couple stories from that in a little bit. But while we were there, we've been there several times. It's a great, beautiful cemetery. It's much larger than you think it is. It's actually behind the Aldi. And it's beautiful, and it goes way back, and it's very historic. And one of the things I love about Mount Pleasant Cemetery is that not only do you see the flags and what are those? Not monuments, but the things for, Daughters of the American Revolution, those spikes that they put into the ground.
They are some sort of monument. Yeah.
They honor volunteer and professional firefighters who are buried there. They have their own flags as well.
That's nice. And
I love that. So there's many reasons I love the cemetery, but one of the stones that we came across, and I believe the name was Brown, but I'm not 100% right now, was a gentleman who lived and died in the 1800s, and right on his stone, it said Civil War Surgeon. And I just stood there and stared at it for a few minutes because, I mean, that was amazing information to just be able to come across without having to dig and research. Because a lot of times what I'll do is I get called to certain stones. Not every stone do I stop at and try to communicate. I just kind of get called to certain ones. And I stopped at this one. Not so I didn't even try to communicate with him, to be honest. But I stopped, and a lot of times you don't get that extra information. So what I'll do is I'll use findagrave.com, which is I highly recommend to everybody, because a lot of times you're not just using it for research purposes in and of itself, but you also get the stories. Sometimes they'll have the obituary of the person, so you get a little bit more background. I have a subscription to MyHeritage, so I use that all the time to find birth and death records, Social Security index, all kinds of stuff like that. I've used it to trace my family. You're more than welcome always. I've told you to use it for yours. But it was just such a cool thing to see Civil War Surgeon right on the memorial stone. It was just so cool.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just something that I like to do, and I've been extremely successful at it. I think my first one that really was something to me was Susan B. Anthony in Rochester, New York. And that was the one that kind of was the one that I said, oh my God, I can really do this. And so I've been doing it ever since. I do it at Oakwood Cemetery in Syracuse that I love. And Dave and I are going back there in a couple of weeks, our inaugural visit of the season. And I do it, whether it's an old cemetery or it's newer graves. It doesn't seem to matter. It's all about who wants to speak to me and who doesn't want to speak to me. And sometimes they don't. Sometimes they'd rather not speak to me, and that's totally fine. But then sometimes they do. So yesterday, Dave and I had the day. It was a gorgeous day here in central New York. And we had the day and we did a few errands. And then we went, our first stop yesterday was the old Madison County poorhouse or poor farm, depending on where you get your research, in Eaton, New York, Eaton. And it's literally 10 minutes from our camp. And we'd been by it a few times, never actually gone there. So we stopped, and it's just this haunting place. Now, in the 1800s, until the late 1800s, it was the poorhouse. And then it became the Garrett Smith Memorial Home and Infirmary until it closed in 1991. And they did treat a lot of soldiers there. A lot of different people there. And just this majestic old building that you and I were talking about earlier, I'm afraid is just going to fall into ruin someday. It's been for sale, but I really can't see someone coming in and restoring it in its present shape. I can only really see a developer coming in and spending a few $1 million to knock it down and redevelop on the land. But it's out in the country, and I don't know if it actually will ever happen. I think I'd much rather see it just sitting there like that than gone completely. If it's the lesser of two evils, I guess I'd rather see it just sitting there like that. Now, on one end, they do have apartments. I don't know what kind of shape the apartments are in, but whatever. Not too much activity out there, but I did get some beautiful pictures, and I'll post them in our group, Stay Weirdos. We didn't know this at the time, but right next to the place, adjacent to it, is the Poor Farms Cemetery. And there are several names there. There are no markers there. But there is a large memorial marker for all of them, per se. In the field. So next time we go out there, we're going to go to the cemetery and pay some respect there. And as I was explaining to Dave this morning, in the 1800s, up until the late 1800s, now we look at the asylums and, things like that of the late 1800s as kind of archaic and inhumane at times. Those people were doing the best they could with the medical knowledge that they had at the time. I know it wasn't always innocent, but, for the most part, I think they did the best they could. However, even before that, the poorhouse was established in 1829. And back in those times, there really were no laws. There were no, guidelines as to who goes in the poorhouse and what happens in the poorhouse. And so basically you had poor folk living with orphans, living with mentally ill people. It was, I'm sure, quite chaotic. Imagine having a 6-year-old little boy who lived in the same building with, rapists or murderers or mentally ill people. I can't even imagine. I just can't even imagine. So that was an interesting place. I definitely going to go back there. Like I said, not too much activity on the outside. I would love to get in there. I don't think I'll ever get in there, but can't blame me for trying. So I'm going to kind of see what I can do. Then we decided to go to the Welsh Church and Cemetery in Nelson, New York. Again, in between Morrisville and Cazenovia. If anybody is interested, it's off Route 20. There's a sign where you turn. I think it's called Welsh Church Road. And this was built in 1887, I believe it was. And the cemetery behind it is quite old. A lot of Welsh immigrants in the cemetery, but a lot of other people as well. It's still there. It's still open. There are still people being buried there. Been by it a few times, always wanted to stop. So we stopped yesterday. And they actually still have summer services there in the church. And they're in English. They're not in Welsh. The church was established, and especially during and after World War II, used quite frequently for the Welsh immigrants in the area so that they could keep their native language, and they were all of the services were in Welsh. Now they're in English I think Sunday evening at 7:00 during the summer. And they have a rotating clergy. It's non-denominational now. So the rotating clergy comes in every Sunday and does a service, which I think is great. And I may actually drive up some Sunday evening this summer and go. But we went into the cemetery and I took my K2 meter. It was just me. Dave stayed in the car. He had, and I forgot to tell you, we did make the inaugural Garrett Smith Estate stop quickly for the summer yesterday as well.
Yeah.
So Dave took a couple EVPs and we couldn't stay long because the bees and the wasps were crazy out there. So hopefully they'll get those under control a little bit. And so we'll be able to make some more stops. But we did do that. So he was listening to the recordings he did in the car. And I went in and I asked if anybody, I walked around slowly and I asked if anybody would like to speak with me. I always say that I come with respect and honor. I tend to be more drawn to, for some reason, and this isn't always the case, but a lot of times I'm drawn to military members.
Right.
Whether it's Civil War, Revolutionary War, War of 1812, right up to, more modern day wars, Vietnam, Korea. I tend to be more drawn to them. Although I did find the twin graves of two little girls, and I did a little research. Mary Jane and Catherine, they were two little girls who passed, very, very little girls. One was, I think, 6 months, and one was like 3 years and 8 months old. And they passed very close together, I'm assuming sickness. And then at the end, and a little bit of activity here and there, but not much. I didn't think anybody was interested in speaking with me there. And at the end of my visit, I ended up going down to more towards the front of the cemetery. And I stopped at, Todd, those white gravestones for the military members?
Yes.
The very white ones. And I stopped at this one. And I'm not going to say the gentleman's name because he passed in 2012. And I wouldn't want to just put his name out there. I will say his name was Donald. And I stopped. And he was a World War II veteran. And as I began talking to him and explaining how he can communicate with me, I start having a conversation with this gentleman. And what was striking to me was that it was a relatively new grave. I mean, he died in 2012. So we're talking 11 years ago. And
I'm proud of you for your math skills, by the way.
Thank you.
I already had that. I already had that.
I had to think about that for a second. And because I'm thinking ahead, I'm always like a game of chess when I'm telling a story. I'm always thinking ahead. So it was relatively new grave. And I thought, well, I don't know if I'm going to get anything with Donald, but let me check. So sure enough, I start, Todd, having this full on K2 yes, no conversation with this gentleman. And I always thank them for their service. I'm always incredibly grateful and thankful to them for what they've done for our country. And I'm very respectful about it. And I set up one of his, those stake things that we were just talking about. One had started to fall over. I set that up for him and made it upright. And I'm speaking with him and I'm asking him things like, does your family still come to visit you? And it goes all the way over. And do you like it here? All kinds of different questions. This gentleman is having a full-on conversation with me. And it's obviously intelligent. And I asked him if it was okay if I come back to visit him. And he said yes.
A very resounding yes. Yes.
Yes. And so how do you... I start to tear up when I'm in the middle of these. You can hear it in my voice. You can hear the shakiness in my voice.
I can always tell when you are. There's a tell with your voice. Yes.
Yes. And these people, they want to communicate. Not everybody wants to communicate with me, but this gentleman does. And this was a newer like his family was there, like visiting him. His family comes and visited him. There's a flower pot there that I'm sure they'll be there soon to refill with flowers for the summer. His wife was next to him. I spoke to his wife briefly and said, are you really happy that you're next to your husband? And it lit up yes. Just being able to communicate with them and remember them and acknowledge them is such a big deal. So you better believe I will see Donald. And visit with him some more because he is very willing to speak with me. So that was an interesting, a very interesting experience. And then we ended up going to Mount Pleasant. And I don't think I sent you this video, Todd. I'll have to send this to you. I think I forgot. Did I send you Marjorie's video?
No.
Well, here we go. So we go in and I'm drawn to this family, this one specific family, this gentleman. And another thing I love about the cemetery is they do walking tours. And a lot of the prominent people that are buried there have sticks into the ground next to the grave with their story. So it tells you about them when you get there. And I'm reading about the gentleman in this family, the patriarch of this family. And then I see next to him one of those military gravestone markers that kind of, they're like brass looking.
Yep.
And I look and lo and behold, it's a woman. And you don't come across many of those for females, especially in those war times.
I was just going to say earlier, no, you're right. It just didn't happen. Yeah.
It just didn't. And so I asked Marjorie, she was a World War II vet. She died in 2001, and that's fairly recent. I asked her if she'd like to talk to me, and lo and behold, here we go again. I thanked her for her service. I asked her questions like, and again, in the middle of these sessions, I sort of almost get myself overwhelmed, and I draw blanks because I don't know where to go with it here and there, because I'm just so overwhelmed with the fact that I'm having these conversations. They're not random conversations. These are literally, I mean, my K2 meter isn't going off until I ask a question and it's a yes.
Right.
And there is no electricity anywhere around me. I mean, we're talking, I'm like near the forest. There's no electricity anywhere. And I'm asking her questions like, were you a nurse? No. Were you overseas? A resounding yes. Were you on the front line? No. Were you support? There was a small yes there. Questions like that are clearly intelligent answers to my questions.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just so grateful to be able to speak with this woman and hear some of her story, because, again, you don't hear of many female veterans who receive those plaques. And this was interesting, though. We stopped at another gentleman's grave, a man who had gotten the Purple Heart. And he was not the least bit interested in talking to me. And that kind of shows you the difference between who's interested and who's not. And that's why I give them the choice. The last place we stopped, this was really interesting. The last place we stopped was at the family plot of an escaped slave named Scipio, or they called him Zip Moorhand. And he escaped from the South and came into Canastota and became free, married his wife Josephine, and they had 2 daughters, Nellie and Hattie. And unfortunately, the 2 daughters died at a young age, and it was very interesting because I think it was Nellie who was 2 years old when she passed. She was born in 1870, passed in 1872. Hattie was born in 1872 and passed in 1874. And not long after, Josephine passed. So I'm assuming it was some sort of sickness. Mm-hmm. It may have been yellow fever, whatever it happened to be at the time. And Zip created, he had a headstone made for his family. And the headstone is there on the side of the road, along with his story. They don't know for sure where he's buried. They don't believe he's buried there with them. They believe he's buried somewhere else in the cemetery, and there are plenty of unmarked graves in the cemetery. So I stopped. I'd been there before, but I didn't have any equipment at the time. And I stopped, and I took my K2 meter, and Todd, I sent you the video. Literally, I have no idea what just what happened. Like, as soon as I set the K2 down by the grave, it was nonstop, like to the max, red constantly. Like Josephine, like these ladies were trying to tell me a story. Like, I don't know. At first I thought, well, maybe it's residual. Like, it was nonstop. Like, they weren't listening to me. There was nothing. They were just talking. And I just stood there like I didn't know what was going on. And so then I would ask them to step away. Nothing happened. Finally, it quieted down and it stepped away. And I started to get a couple of intelligent answers. But I have no idea. Like, there's some things in life like this that you just probably never make sense of.
Right.
When we go back, what we're going to do is I'm going to try it again and see what happens. But again, there is no electricity. I mean, there's no reason to have electricity in the cemetery. Like, if there was electricity in the cemetery, every grave I stopped at would probably have some activity.
Would be lighting up, correct.
There's nothing. So I have no idea. So that was my day yesterday. I went home sort of in awe of the fact that there really are spirits, energies, people who have passed who want to tell their story. They want to talk to you. My recommendation is, if you decide you want to go and try to do it, you go with complete and utter respect. And I think one of the reasons they talk to me is because I go with a very pure heart. Like, I literally go wanting, like, with that, not thrill seeking, but wanting to help them. And so I'm always blown away by the fact that there are people who want to talk to me and they want their stories told. And I think if they didn't want their stories told, that they wouldn't be talking to me.
Right.
Or they're proud. You know, I mean, I talked to a female veteran from World War II. I don't know what she did, but she wasn't a nurse. I don't know what she did, but she wanted to tell me that she is here. You know, it's really interesting.
I love it. I told you before we started the podcast, if we could somehow segue a lot of what we do into this, to me, it's just so interesting.
You know what it reminded me of? And two things. Number one, we should do this in Cleveland.
Yeah.
So we can do it together.
Yeah.
Definitely we'll do it together because look at all of the amazing luck we had.
I mean, shit, we could just go to Cleveland and do this, and that'd be the entire trip. Like every moment.
I already warned Dave. I said, you know, we're probably just going to run around and go to cemeteries and do weird things.
With ghost hunting equipment. Backpacks and stuff.
Get ready. He's like, you guys just go. Because we'll have Spike with us. He's like, you guys just go where you want to go. And, you know, it'll be fun. And then we'll just we'll eat at the house. We'll hang out at the house and stuff. But if you guys want to go on jaunts to do things, he's like, just go. You'll have fun. But the other thing is that, again, you really have to do it with a pure heart and good intentions and really wanting to help in some way, because we'll all be there someday. We'll all be in that situation. And I don't want people to feel forgotten. You know, and that's another thing too. I know I'm talking a lot in this episode like I always do, but that's another thing too, is that these people I spoke with this weekend were really some of the youngest people, you know what I mean? Like the youngest graves.
Right.
That I've spoken to. And I was a little surprised by that, because I think that a lot of the times when I speak to people who have been departed for a long time, they don't have relatives visiting them. Oh, and I asked Marjorie if her family visited her, and of course she says yes. They don't have relatives visiting them because most of them have passed on themselves.
So think about this as a theory. And I don't even use the word theory, but a thought process. So, you know, like my belief system is that when you die, your spirit, your energy scatters and you can go wherever you want and whatever.
Right.
What if, because people don't visit, there's really no reason for their energy to be there. That little bit of energy, right? So
I'm smiling like a kid because that is okay, go for it.
Was that going to be your little thing that you're going to present?
For the most part. And I'm glad that you're... No, because that shows you how alike we are in our thought process about things. Talk about it, and then I'll add what I...
Well, I just, you know, like we came upon my mom at the lighthouse. There's no reason for her to be there, right?
Right.
But she was there because we were there. That's why she came, right?
Right.
So if people aren't visiting, there's no reason for their energy to be there. There's no reason for them to hang out.
Right.
So maybe because some of these departed are being visited and people are going to the graves, maybe that's enough for some of their energy to be there when called upon. I'm not saying it's always there, but maybe because it's kind of fresh for them to be there. If somebody like you or I comes around to have conversation and get to know, maybe it's enough for them to have their energy appear and respond.
That was a big aha moment for me this
It was just an aha moment for me listening to you. Yeah.
Last weekend, we just took a drive. It wasn't opening weekend of camp or anything. We just took a drive. And there's a cemetery that is about 15 minutes from our house on the way to camp that I like to stop at occasionally. And there's some very old graves there. And we stopped, and I took out the K2 meter. And Dave usually waits in the car if we have Spike with us. And I go out, and I find that it's a little bit easier for me if I'm by myself. And I found this family who the patriarch was a Revolutionary War soldier. I was actually communicating with this family. And let's face it, they don't get any visitors anymore. I don't think it's always necessarily what we think, the newer people with relatives. I think that sometimes if you call upon them, if you speak to them, if you mention something that meant something to them, I talked about thank you for your service, sir, and, being a Revolutionary War soldier and all of that stuff. And so the family came to me. But I do think that you're right. I do think that having people visit them kind of stirs that up a little bit, that excitement that people are visiting. Case in point, next week when we talk about our visit to Pennsylvania, I'll tell the story, but there's a woman there in a family tomb who gets visited all the time because her family's tomb is on one of the history walks in the cemetery.
Oh.
Had a total conversation with this woman, and we'll talk more about it next week, but had a total conversation with this woman. So I think you're right. I do think that when their memories are, when the fire is kind of stoked a bit, it does enable it to be a little bit easier to communicate with them, because I think that they are more used to having that attention. One thing I do believe, and I've said this before, and I really truly believe this, is that no spirit and no energy is bound physically to any area. I do not believe. Now, mentally and emotionally, they may bind theirself to an area or a location, but I don't think physically they are bound there. I do believe that they can come and go as they please. That would explain a lot about the cemeteries. And when you call upon them, I always read the names on the stones. I always talk about that. Any information that I see on the stones, I talk about it. I give birth and death dates. Anything that I can find to acknowledge them and maybe call them in and let them know that I'm thinking about them. A lot of people think that there are no ghosts, there are no spirits, there are no energies, as I roll my eyes, in cemeteries. Why would you want to go to a cemetery and talk to dead people? Well, because that's not true. And my theory is that those stones, I never really understood the whole idea of why people have elaborate stones or memorial stones on graves. And then it kind of dawned on me this weekend. It was another aha moment. That is their story. And so if you're paying attention to or talking about their stone, if you're giving your energy to their stone, why wouldn't they come and visit something that tells their story? If you're there giving them that attention. Do I think they're there all the time? Not at all. But I think that part of them will always be tied to the last little piece of remembrance that they have.
Yep. As you've been talking, I hopped on Find a Grave. I've used this over the years too, but I haven't been on for a while. And I just popped on, and the cemetery where my parents are buried, I do have family members there. My father's my father's parents are there. One of his brothers is there, and two of his brothers are there, and I do know that my grandmother's family is there as well, but I never knew anything. I didn't know where they were, whatever. And so I just popped in some quick information, and it actually shows you about where in the cemetery there's a little pin that drops. And so now I want to go there, and I want to see because I didn't know anything about my grandparents, my great grandparents, and their family on my grandmother's side. I just didn't. And they're right there. I mean, they're down a ways from where my parents are, but it's like, now I want to go and check it out.
It's so exciting to be able to do that. And a lot of times back in those days, is the more generations you go back, the less written records there are, the less more complete records there are. So it makes it more difficult to find their stories, and they didn't talk a lot about themselves back then. You just didn't do it. Like as far back as like my great grandparents never talked about their lives or their stories. Dave ran into the same thing. And so sometimes just going there fulfills that need for family history. You know?
It's interesting because on my mom's side, they painstakingly put together a family tree book. And it's huge.
That's awesome.
And they go back, and it's great. But on my father's side, nothing. And you were here on this podcast when I talked about my great-grandfather's house and coming across that and finding that and all the excitement that there was with that. And I think I've also said this story, but for years growing up, going to school every day, I drove past my great-grandparents' farm on my grandmother's side, and I never knew it was theirs. I didn't know, because even though my father drove past it with me 150 times, he never said to me, well, that's where Grandma and Grandpa were.
Right. You know, it's funny, as you get older, I look back and there's so many things I wish I had asked my grandparents.
Of course. Or
and
even
I'm
your parents,
like,
you know?
Anybody, you know, it's like, come on, I wish I had asked these questions. And there are great sites like Find a Grave. My Heritage has helped me greatly. I have the yearly subscription to it. My Heritage has really helped me. But Find a Grave is great because, as I'll tell the story next week, I actually used it to help find my ancestors' grave, because the cemetery we went to was absolutely humongous, and they don't have it marked. So you have to literally drive around looking for what you're looking for. It was ridiculous. So I actually used Find a Grave to my advantage in a way that most people wouldn't expect or think to use. And it worked. So we'll talk a lot more about that next week.
I wish we would have thought about Find a Grave when we were looking for Ed Gein's grave, because we literally were looking at pictures online and trying to find the trees that, and all that.
But we found it. I couldn't believe it.
Because I'm freaking Columbo in a graveyard, so, you know.
But we were flying blind on that one. We stopped at a different cemetery. So, and then, remember a few months later, we're having these dreams about it. So I don't know. That was crazy.
There was a reason why we. All right, we're gonna check out our spiel real quick.
Yes.
You can find the Sandy and Toddcast on any of the platforms that you normally find your podcasts, including YouTube and Twitter. Be sure to like the Sandy and Toddcast on Facebook to keep up on the latest goings-on, including each week's episode. You can also join our group, Stay Weirdos, Friends of the Sandy and Toddcast, for more fun. Stay Weirdos is a safe place to share your thoughts, feelings, ideas, and random inappropriate memes without judgment. Sandy and Todd also have a podcast called the Empathecary Podcast. It's for empaths, by empaths. And if you know an empath, you might want to listen too. Find and like the page on Facebook. And finally, if you're thinking about starting your own podcast and just aren't sure where to start, Sandy and Todd can also help with that too. Mindgarden Media is their latest project, where the dynamic duo can guide you every step of the way in your podcasting journey. Editing, producing, and consulting is what they do. Like Mindgarden Media on Facebook, or email them at themindgardenmedia@gmail.com. And as always, thanks for staying weird.
All right. So
yeah, just some stories about my day. I may put some of those videos up on in our Stay Weirdos group, just so everybody can check them out and see. And I'll send you the Marjorie one. Just fascinating, and heartfelt, and it just fills your heart with hope.
Yeah,
that these people are living on in their own way. And maybe it isn't the end.
The unforgotten. right?
That's right.
That's right.
That's right.
All right. Until next week, enjoy your week. Make sure and listen to older episodes of the Sandy and Toddcast. Maybe some of those videos will show up somewhere down the road.
That's right.
Until next week. Bye.
Bye.